I was set up on a date with a single mom. Then her son said something shocking. I almost cancelled 3 times before I even got out of my truck. Not because I was scared of dating. I'd done plenty of that. Bad dates, good dates, the kind where you laugh so hard you forget to eat, the kind where you check the time before the appetizer even arrives. What scared me about this one was the 6-year-old attached to it. My name is Nathan Hale, 35, a structural engineer who spent most of his week staring at blueprints and most of his weekends alone, which I told myself was a choice and not a habit. My coworker Priya had been trying to set me up for 2 years with the persistence of a woman who considered my single status a personal insult to her matchmaking skills. I'd said no every time. Not because the women weren't nice. Because I'd learned the hard way that being the reliable one, the steady one, the guy who shows up on time and remembers your coffee order, doesn't always translate into being the guy someone wants to keep. Then Priya mentioned Claire. She's a single mom, Priya said, like she was handing me a warning label instead of a phone number. 6-year-old son. Really smart, really funny, been through a rough divorce. I think you two would actually work. A single mom, I repeated. Don't say it like that. I'm not saying it like anything. I'm processing. You're overthinking. Which, coincidentally, is also something Claire does. See? Compatible already. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for 2 weeks, which for me counted as reckless speed. Then Priya sent me a photo of Claire at a work event, laughing at something off camera, her whole face lit up like she'd forgotten to perform for the picture. I stared at that photo longer than I want to admit. There was something about the way she laughed. Unguarded. Like joy hadn't been rationed out of her yet, even after whatever she'd survived. I texted Priya back one word. Fine. The date was set for a Thursday evening at a quiet Italian place downtown, the kind with candles that were more decorative than functional and a menu that didn't list prices next to the specials, which always makes me nervous in a way I can't fully explain. I got there 10 minutes early because that's who I am, and I sat at the bar nursing a water and rehearsing small talk in my head like an idiot. She walked in at 6:58. Claire Bennett was 32, dark hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless but definitely wasn't, wearing a soft blue sweater that made her eyes look brighter than they probably were in regular lighting. She scanned the room once, found me, and smiled the kind of smile that was polite on the surface and nervous underneath it, which somehow made me less nervous, like we were both walking into this blind. Nathan? She asked. Guilty, I said, standing. Claire? That's me. Sorry I'm late. My son informed me at the door that he needed to tell me something extremely urgent, which turned out to be a fact about narwhals. Was it a good fact? Apparently narwhal tusks are actually teeth. He was very passionate about it. That is objectively interesting. You're supposed to say you don't care, so I feel better about abandoning him with a babysitter. I do care. I'm sorry. I care too much. This date is ruined. She laughed, real and quick, and something in my chest loosened that I didn't know had been tight. We Saturday. We ordered. The conversation moved easier than I expected, the kind of easy that comes from two people who have both been burned enough times to skip the performance and go straight to honesty. She told me about her divorce in broad strokes, nothing bitter, just tired in the specific way people get when they've explained something too many times. Her ex-husband had decided, around the time their son turned 3, that fatherhood required less presence than he'd budgeted for. He'd moved 2 states away for a job that conveniently also moved him away from bedtime and homework and every version of parenting that doesn't show up on a highlight reel. He calls on birthdays, Claire said, turning her water glass slowly on the tablecloth. Sometimes. It's fine. Milo's used to it, which is the part that actually breaks my heart, that a 6-year-old has already adjusted his expectations downward. That's not fine, I said. You're allowed to say it's not fine. She looked up at me, something shifting in her expression, like she hadn't expected me to push back instead of just nodding along. Most people just say, "That's rough," and change the subject, she said. I'm not most people. I'm annoyingly direct. It's cost me a few dates. Good direct or bad direct? Depends who you ask. My last girlfriend called it exhausting. My mother calls it my best quality. I try to remember my mother is probably right. Claire smiled at that, a real one, settling into her chair like she'd decided, at least for the moment, that this wasn't a mistake. Dinner went well. Better than well. We argued lightly about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. She said yes, I said absolutely not, and somehow that argument turned into 45 minutes of conversation about food, childhood, the specific chaos of growing up with 3 older brothers who used me as a practice dummy for wrestling moves they'd seen on television. She laughed at the right places. She asked good questions, the kind that meant she was actually listening instead of waiting for her turn to talk. By the time dessert arrived, I'd stopped checking my phone entirely, which for me is basically a marriage proposal. I should get home, she said eventually, glancing at her phone. Milo's with my neighbor, and he has a bedtime that he treats as more of a suggestion when I'm not there to enforce it. Of course, I said. This was really nice, Claire. It was, she said, and there was something careful in the way she said it, like she was choosing the word deliberately. I don't usually do this. Blind dates. Dates. Period. Milo's my whole world right now. I don't bring people around unless I actually mean it. I felt that sentence land somewhere important. I'd like to see you again, I said. If that's something you'd want. She studied me for a second, the kind of look that felt like she was doing math I couldn't see the numbers to. Would you want to meet him? Milo. The question surprised me. Most people I dated treated the kid as a hurdle to clear eventually, not an early checkpoint. I'd like that, I said, and I meant it, even though my stomach did something complicated at the thought. Saturday, she said. We're doing the park near my apartment. Nothing fancy. He'll probably talk your ear off about narwhals again. I can handle narwhals. We'll see. Saturday came faster than I wanted it to, which is a strange thing to say about a park visit, but I'd spent the better part of Friday night lying awake running through scenarios of how a 6-year-old might react to a strange man showing up in his mother's life. I had no siblings, kids, no nephews, no real practice with anyone under the age of 12. My only qualification was that I'd once been a kid myself, a long time ago, in circumstances I didn't like to think about too closely. The park was one of those newer ones, rubber mulch instead of sand, a climbing structure shaped like a ship. Claire was sitting on a bench when I arrived, watching a small boy scale the rigging with the kind of fearless commitment only children under 10 possess. He had her dark hair and a gap where his front tooth used to be, and he was narrating his own climb out loud to nobody in particular. There he is, Claire said, standing as I approached. Milo, baby, come here for a second. The boy slid down a pole with the confidence of someone who'd done it 100 times and jogged over, breathing hard, cheeks flushed. Milo, this is my friend Nathan, Claire said. Milo looked up at me with the frank, unfiltered assessment that only children are capable of, the kind adults have trained themselves out of. He tilted his head slightly. Hi, he said. Are you mommy's boyfriend? Milo, Claire said, half laughing, half mortified. We're friends, I said carefully, crouching down to his level because that felt like the right thing to do, even though my knees complained about it later. "It's nice to meet you. Your mom told me you know a lot about novels." Milo's face lit up instantly, all embarrassment forgotten. "Their tusks are actually teeth," he said. "Really long teeth. And only the boys have them usually, but sometimes girls do too, and scientists don't totally know why." "That's incredible," I said, and I meant it, because it was the kind of fact that made you look at the world a little differently, and also because his enthusiasm was genuinely contagious. "Do you want to see me go across the monkey bars?" he asked, already backing away toward the structure. "I can do it without falling now. I could only do half before." "I would love to see that," I said, and I stood up and watched him run back, and when I glanced at Claire, she was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite name, something soft and slightly stunned, like she'd expected this to go worse and didn't know what to do with the fact that it hadn't. "He likes you," she said quietly. "He's met me for 90 seconds. He likes you," she said again. "Trust me. I know his tells." We spent the next hour at the park, Milo demonstrating every piece of equipment with the seriousness of an Olympic athlete, Claire and I sitting on the bench trading commentary and occasional glances that lasted a beat longer than they needed to. It was easy in a way I hadn't expected, easy in a way that made the whole thing feel less like a test and more like something I actually wanted. Then Milo ran over, breathless, and climbed up onto the bench between us like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Can Nathan come to my birthday party?" he asked Claire. "Milo, his birthday isn't for 2 months, Claire said. "I know, but I want to ask early so he doesn't get busy." Claire looked at me over the top of his head, eyebrows raised in a silent question. I laughed. "I'll clear my schedule," I said. Milo nodded, satisfied, like the matter was now officially settled, and hopped down to run back toward the slide. Claire watched him go, then turned to me with something like wonder on her face. "He doesn't usually warm up that fast," she said. "It took him for months to stop hiding behind my leg around my own sister." "Maybe he can just tell," I said. "Tell what?" I didn't have a good answer for that, so I just smiled, and she smiled back, and for a second the park noise faded into something quieter, something that felt like the beginning of an actual chapter instead of just another first date. We started seeing each other regularly after that. Nothing rushed, nothing dramatic, just a slow accumulation of dinners and park visits and evenings on her couch after Milo went to bed, talking in low voices about nothing important and everything that mattered. I learned that Claire worked as a physical therapist, that she'd put herself through school while pregnant, that she kept a framed drawing Milo had made of the two of them holding hands taped to her refrigerator even though the paper had gone soft and curled at the corners from 3 years of humidity. I learned that Milo asked about me on the days I wasn't there. Claire told me that almost apologetically, like she thought it might scare me off, this evidence that her son was already attaching to someone who hadn't earned permanence yet. It didn't scare me. If anything, it made something in my chest ache in a way I hadn't felt in years, a specific tenderness I didn't have a name for until later. 3 months in, Claire invited me to a small family dinner, her parents, her sister, the kind of thing that meant something in the language of new relationships. I said yes before she'd even finished the sentence. The dinner went fine, better than fine, actually, warm in the way family dinners are supposed to be and rarely are. Claire's mother liked me, or at least liked me enough to ask detailed questions about my job that suggested genuine interest rather than polite interrogation. Claire's sister, Amanda, spent most of the night watching me with the sharp, protective attention of someone who'd clearly seen her sister get hurt before and wasn't going to let it happen twice without a fight. It was after dinner, during dessert, when Milo said the thing that changed everything. We were sitting around the table, plates mostly cleared, coffee cups steaming, the easy lull of a meal winding down. Milo had been quiet for a few minutes, which for him was unusual, pushing a piece of cake around his plate with the distracted energy of a kid thinking hard about something. Then he looked up at me, straight across the table, and said, "Nathan, are you going to leave like my other dad did?" The table went silent. I felt the question land somewhere deep, past my ribs, past whatever defenses I usually kept up in conversations like this. Claire's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Her mother's eyes flicked to me with something between alarm and curiosity. Amanda actually set her cup down, watching me with the intensity of someone deciding, in real time, whether I deserved her sister. "Milo," Claire started, voice tight with the specific panic of a parent whose kid has just said the unfiltered thing out loud in front of company. "It's okay," I said quietly, and I meant it, even though my heart was doing something complicated. I turned to Milo, who was watching me with the same frank, unguarded seriousness he'd had at the park that first day. "That's a really important question," I said. "Can I answer it honestly?" He nodded. "I don't know everything that's going to happen in the future," I said. "Nobody does. But I can tell you that I'm not planning on going anywhere. And more than that, I can tell you that if I ever did think about leaving, I'd have to look at your face first and decide if I could live with that. And I don't think I could." The table was quiet. Claire's eyes had gone bright, glassy, her hand pressed flat against the tablecloth like she needed something solid to hold onto. Milo considered this with the gravity of a much older person. "Okay," he said finally, and then, almost as an afterthought, "you should probably learn more novel facts, though. In case you're going to be around a lot." The table broke into laughter, the tension dissolving into something warm and relieved, and Claire reached over and squeezed my hand under the table so hard it almost hurt. But that wasn't the shocking thing. That was just the moment that cracked something open. The shocking thing came 3 weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, when Milo said something that stopped my whole world. We were at Claire's apartment, the three of us on the living room floor, building an elaborate Lego structure that Milo had been narrating with increasing complexity for the better part of an hour. Claire was in the kitchen finishing dinner, humming along to something on the radio, and Milo and I were deep in the process of constructing what he'd informed me was a novel research station, which apparently required several towers and an unnecessarily complicated drawbridge. "Nathan," he said, not looking up from the Lego piece he was trying to fit into place, "did you used to help my mommy before?" "A long time ago." I paused, confused. "I don't think so, buddy. Your mom and I met a few months ago. Remember, at the restaurant?" "No," he said, with the patient certainty of a kid correcting an adult on a fact he was sure about. "Before that. When I was really little. Mommy has a picture. She keeps it in her jewelry box. It's a man who looks like you and is helping her with the car." I felt something cold move through my chest. "What kind of picture?" I asked carefully. "I found it one time when I was looking for her earrings for the play," Milo said. "There's a man and mommy standing by a car on the side of the road, and it's raining, and mommy's crying in the picture, but she's smiling too. She said someone took it a long time ago on their phone. I asked her who their man was and she said he was somebody who was kind to her once when she really needed it." I sat completely still, the Lego piece forgotten in my hand. Claire appeared in the doorway, dish towel in her hands, her face pale in a way I'd never seen before, like Milo had just said something she'd spent years trying to keep buried. "Milo," she said, voice careful, "why don't you go wash up for dinner, okay, buddy?" He shrugged, unbothered, and scampered off toward the bathroom, leaving the two of us in a silence that felt enormous. "Claire," I said slowly, "what is he talking about?" She sat down heavily on the arm of the couch, twisting the dish towel in her hands. 6 years ago, she said, before Milo was born, I was 7 months pregnant and driving home from a doctor's appointment during a storm. My car broke down on the side of the highway. It was pouring rain, I had no cell service, and I was terrified. My ex was traveling for work and wasn't answering his phone. I felt my pulse pick up, some part of my brain already reaching toward a memory I hadn't touched in years. A truck pulled over, she continued. A man got out in the rain, no umbrella, nothing, and he spent 45 minutes trying to get my car running again. When he couldn't fix it, he called a tow truck on his own phone, waited with me until it came, gave the tow truck driver money to make sure I got home safe, and then he just left. I never got his name. I was so overwhelmed I forgot to ask until he was already driving away. My hands had gone cold. There was a photo, she said, looking at me now with an expression I couldn't quite categorize, somewhere between disbelief and something fragile, trying not to hope too hard. My phone had died, but a woman who'd stopped behind us took a picture on hers, of him helping me, and she sent it to me later because she thought it was sweet. I kept it. I don't know why. I think some part of me needed to remember that there were still people like that in the world, especially after everything that happened with Milo's father. I closed my eyes. Claire, I said quietly, what year was that? What month? She told me. The exact week matched, down to the storm that had knocked out power across 3 counties that spring, a storm I remembered specifically because I'd been driving home from visiting my brother in the hospital, distracted and heartbroken and looking for any excuse to not go straight home to an empty apartment. I remembered pulling over for a pregnant woman stranded on the shoulder because some instinct in me, worn raw from watching my brother fight through chemo, couldn't drive past someone who needed help without stopping. I remember you, I said, my voice barely steady. I remember your car. A silver sedan. You had a stack of baby books on the passenger seat that had slid onto the floor when I opened the door to check the engine. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. I never got your name, I said. I never even thought about it again, not really, not until right now. I was in a bad place that year. My brother was sick. I didn't think about much of anything except getting through each day. But I remember thinking, driving away, that I hoped you and the baby were okay. Tears were sliding down Claire's face now, and she wasn't bothering to wipe them away. I kept that picture for 6 years, she said. Through the divorce, through everything. Some nights when things felt impossible, I'd look at it and remind myself that a stranger had once stopped in the rain for no reason except that it was the right thing to do, and that meant the world still had good people in it somewhere. And then Priya set us up, and I sat down across from you at that restaurant, and something felt so familiar I almost said something, but I told myself I was imagining it. That it was impossible. It's not impossible, I said. It's you. It was always going to find its way back somehow. We sat there for a long moment, the two of us, letting the full weight of it settle, the strange enormous coincidence that wasn't really a coincidence at all if you believed in the kind of thing my grandmother used to call the universe closing its own loops. Claire crossed the room and sat down next to me on the floor, close enough that I could feel her shaking slightly. I have to ask you something, she said. And I need you to be honest. Always. Did you know? When Priya set us up. Did you somehow know it was me? No, I said. I had no idea. I hadn't thought about that night in years, honestly. I buried it under everything else that was happening at the time. It wasn't until Milo said the thing about the picture that it all came back. She studied my face for a long moment, searching for something, and whatever she found seemed to satisfy her, because the tension in her shoulders finally released. I think, she said slowly, that this is either the strangest coincidence in the world, or it's the opposite of a coincidence. I don't really know how to feel about that. Maybe it's both, I said. Maybe some things get to be true in more than one way. She laughed, wet and disbelieving, and leaned her head against my shoulder. Milo's going to be insufferable about this, she said. He's going to think he's a detective now. He kind of is one, I said. He solved something we didn't even know was a mystery. We stayed like that for a while, quiet, letting the strange gravity of the moment settle into something we could actually hold. Dinner sat forgotten on the stove. Somewhere down the hall, we could hear Milo humming to himself while he washed his hands, blissfully unaware that he'd just cracked open 6 years of quiet, private hope his mother had never told anyone about. That night, after Milo was asleep, Claire brought out the photo. It was worn at the edges, the kind of soft that comes from being held too many times, tucked into too many pockets and drawers over the years. I looked at it for a long time. A younger version of myself, soaked through, crouched by an open car hood in the pouring rain, and a young pregnant woman standing beside him with an expression that was somehow both terrified and grateful at once. I used to wonder about you, Claire admitted, sitting close beside me on the couch, the photo between us. Not romantically. Just, I wondered who you were. What kind of life you'd built. Whether you were happy. It felt strange to think about a stranger that much, but you'd shown up at the worst possible moment and made it bearable, and some part of me just wanted to know you'd made it through whatever you were struggling with, too. Because I could tell, even then, that you were carrying something heavy that night. My brother died for months after that, I said quietly. The cancer came back stronger than the doctors expected. I think some part of me stopping to help you that night was the only useful thing I felt like I'd done in months. Everything else felt out of my control. That felt like the one thing I could actually fix. Claire took my hand, quiet, steady, the kind of comfort that doesn't need words attached to it. I'm sorry, she said. About your brother. Thank you, I said. And I'm glad you're okay. I'm glad Milo's okay. I think about that a lot now, actually, knowing it was you. That whatever I did that night mattered more than I realized. It mattered enormously, she said. You have no idea. We sat there together for a long time after that, the photo resting between us like a small strange miracle, the kind of thing you don't plan for and can't manufacture, the universe apparently keeping better records than either of us had given it credit for. 6 months later, I moved in with Claire and Milo. It wasn't a dramatic decision. It was the natural conclusion of 100 small ones, dinners that turned into weekends, weekends that turned into keeping a toothbrush at her place, a toothbrush that turned into a drawer that turned into an honest conversation about whether we were both ready for something permanent. We were. Milo helped me carry boxes up the stairs on moving day, insisting on carrying the lightest one himself with theatrical effort, informing every neighbor we passed that my mom's boyfriend is moving in and he knows a lot about novels now. I did, in fact, know a lot about novels now. I'd made it a point to learn. A year after that first blind date, I proposed to Claire on the same stretch of highway where I'd once stopped for a stranger in the rain. It wasn't romantic in any conventional sense, no candles, no string quartet, just a shoulder of asphalt and a guardrail and the ordinary hum of passing cars. But it felt right in a way nothing else would have. Claire cried before I even got the ring out of my pocket, because she understood immediately what the location meant, understood that some circles in life do close themselves eventually if you're patient and lucky enough to let them. Milo was our ring bearer at the wedding. He walked down the aisle with a seriousness that suggested he considered the job the most important assignment of his young life, and when he reached the front, instead of handing me the ring immediately, he looked up at me and whispered, loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear, I told you. I knew you'd stay. I married Claire on a Saturday in October, under a sky the exact grey of that storm 6 years earlier, though this time nobody's car broke down and nobody needed rescuing, unless you counted the way we'd both quietly rescued each other from two very different kinds of loneliness without either of us realizing that's what we were doing. Sometimes people ask how we met, and Claire has developed a habit of telling the short version first. A friend set us up, and then, if the person seems like they can handle it, the longer version, the storm, the highway, the photo she'd kept for years without knowing his name. People's faces always do the same thing when she tells the full story, this slow unfolding of disbelief into something like wonder, the recognition that maybe the universe really does keep track of its kindnesses somewhere and finds a way to pay them back eventually, even when you've stopped expecting anything at all. Milo is 8 now. He still knows an alarming amount about narwhals, though his interests have expanded to include several other species he considers equally underappreciated. He still sleeps with the framed copy of that rainy roadside photo on his nightstand, the one Claire had framed properly once the truth came out, a strange, soft, ordinary miracle hanging on the wall of a little boy's room, proof that sometimes the most important moments in your life happen years before you know they are important at all. I think about that night on the highway often, the version of myself who pulled over in the rain not knowing anything except that someone needed help and I couldn't keep driving past it. I didn't know I was building something that would come back to me years later dressed up as a blind date and a 6-year-old's straightforward, devastating honesty. I didn't know that helping a stranger change a tire in a storm would somehow become the first sentence of the rest of my life. But it did. And I'm endlessly grateful that it found its way back to me, the exact way it needed to, at exactly the moment I was finally ready to let it. Would you have believed it if a child told you something like that out of nowhere? Have you ever had a small act of kindness come back around in a way you never expected? Tell me your story in the comments. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.